Without a doubt, Cry of Fear is one of the best survival horror experiences anyone can play. That experience being free without having to purchase at full cost. The psychological horror leaves a haunting impression on you with its disturbing imagery that is ingrained into your memory. Gameplay mechanics that innovate with such limitations it has and makes the best of it. A story that takes an emotional toll on your psyche with its themes and symbolism of the human condition, of how far a human would go in facing their fears. While this may be common knowledge now, especially a decade later, one thing that I imagine that not too many people know about is the extensive history of the lost and cut content of Cry of Fear, containing many scrapped items that were once considered for gameplay, unused animations that would have made death animations much more gruesome, and early beta content that is drastically different from the final designs that we have today. Let's begin. Early screenshots of the beta for Cry of Fear show slightly different designs for the melee weapon, the switchblade. Initially, the switchblade had a thinner blade while the hilt of the knife looked bulky. The final version shows a drastically improved render of the knife, along with an updated texture to the knife model. The digital camera has a different design in comparison to the final version, having more illegible text on the digital screen, along with other buttons on the interface. Here, we also see an early beta model of the common enemy, the Slower. Interestingly, the early model seems to be a mix of the Slower that you first encounter with its green striped shirt in the sewers, and the later variations seen in-game, with their balding black hair on the sides of their head. The Slower's face seems to be far more contorted, as well as less bloodstains on their shirt. Simon's phone looks to closely resemble the one we see in the final version. However, the phone looks more distant from the player's view, making the text on the phone you typically see in-game unlegible in the early version. In comparison to the final version, where it's more legible to read, the early version of Simon's phone seems to have a brighter illuminated flashlight when exploring dark environments as opposed to the final version, where the flashlight on Simon's phone is much more toned down in its brightness. There is a removed cutscene that would have taken place on one of the floors for the apartments, where we see Simon's beta model kneeling down. However, I can't seem to find any footage of this cutscene as I couldn't find it anywhere, only this screenshot. The inventory system looked drastically different from its earlier design, with a rusted and metallic look, along with a minimalist approach to the weapon slots and options. Initially, it would have had 12 slots available for the player to choose from, with either weapons or items being located together. The options to select an item or weapon were Use, Drop, Equip, and Check. When checking the item, you get an item description as well as an image to accompany it. Finally, Simon would have shown his face of the beta model version. In comparison, the final version of the inventory had a rusted yet decayed design and limited inventory slots, much like the earlier version. However, the inventory has been significantly limited to 6 slots now, which are separated into bags and pockets. Quick select for selecting an item or weapon with your hotkeys has been made easier instead of opening your inventory manually. Notes have been added for Simon to jot down clues relating to solving puzzles, and current objective has been added to remind the player of their goal. Finally, Simon's face of his beta model is removed entirely. Speaking of Simon's beta model, Simon has undergone many different variations when designing his player model. His earliest design shows a beta model that looks rough in its quality, mostly due in part to the Gold Source engine displaying such textures for its time. However, over the development period, Team Cyclar would push the boundaries of the Gold Source engine and get an updated model of Simon's player model. His former player model looks practically the same as his final player model we play in-game, with the exception of his black hair having longer bangs covering his left eye, whereas his final design shows his black hair significantly shorter. Interestingly enough, Simon's beta model can actually be seen for a quick second if you pause the frame during the opening nightmare sequence. Dr. Purnell had an earlier beta model that looked very similar to his final version, albeit the lab coat looks brighter with a white color. Sophie had a drastically different look to her design when it came to her early beta model. Here, she has a light pink jacket, light blue jeans, and light pink shoes. Upon closer inspection, her face model also appears to look different compared to her final face model. The cops you play in the co-op and manhunt campaigns had an early model that had a rougher looking texture that looked unfinished and incomplete. An unused animation called cutscene_test shows a floating green rectangular box when viewing the model. Another unused animation called faster2.mdl shows one of the enemies you encounter, the male version of the Faster. piercing the beta model of Simon with a sharp blade through his neck and then into his stomach by lifting his body, to then proceed to slam him into the ground. We also have a screenshot of what appears to be an unused animation of an enemy receiving a headshot with their head exploding upon impact. This initially was supposed to be a gameplay mechanic, possibly making it easier to kill enemies with a headshot, but was scrapped for unknown reasons. An enemy called the Tin Pen was cut from the final version. An image of the enemy's design is modeled, however, showing it's completed. This enemy's design shows a decapitated head with its vision blinded by a blindfold, with 4 tendrils supporting its movement. Supposedly, the enemy's behavior would have been related to that of an enemy in Half-Life called the Snark. One of the enemies you encounter later on in the city, called the walkthroughs, was initially supposed to have a boss fight. Apparently, this boss fight incorporated unused attack animations, a battle theme, and the ability to simulate the fasters to help assist in the boss fight. One of the many unlockables in-game that was cut was a bulletproof vest. When Simon wears this bulletproof vest, he received less damage, although the drawback would be his stamina being reduced, due to the weight it carries, and the item would take up an inventory slot. The original handgun, the Taurus PT-92, was supposed to be the starting pistol Simon would find in the apartments. Interestingly, this pistol is based on the same handgun model seen in Afraid of Monsters. However, this handgun would be unused, and instead favored the Glock 19 as a starting pistol. An unused walkie-talkie would have been featured during the co-op campaign to communicate with your friends or other players. 2 leftover graphics from Half-Life show the Lambda logo, as well as Gordon Freeman with a loading screen. Placeholder textures of 2 drawings show text that says glass and LOL, along with a drawing, followed with haha and paper, along with a smiley face. The next images show disclaimers of the end splash screen for the demo version that was available to the public before the final release of Cry of Fear. One of the unused subway light textures has a hidden LOL as text. There's a doodle of a blue neutral looking face. In the level editor, there are leftovers that are left in the game files that shows various logos and faces. One of these logos is the Lambda logo once again. An unused texture of an eyeball used for testing the model's animations is found in the game's files. An unused text on Simon's phone reads, "Take the stairs. Up, up, up. I've got something to show you." The texture for the phone model is also unedited, as it still contains the logo and name brand of Sony Ericsson. An unused model of an error, can't find model, can be found in the game's files. Typically, models that get accidentally removed in-game will be alerted with this message. In October 2020, Team Cyclar uploaded a video showing 1 hour of beta footage of a cancelled Cry of Fear remake. This remake would have been remade on the Source engine, the engine that followed after the Gold Source engine, on which the original Cry of Fear was developed on. From what we can gather from the footage, it appears that the graphics would have received a massive overhaul, updating much of the textures in the characters' models, environments, weapons, and items. The gameplay mechanics would have been the same, albeit tweaked and refined to provide quality of life improvements. Animations for both Simon and the enemies in-game would have been greatly expanded upon with variety in their movements. According to Andreas Ronberg, the creator and lead developer of Cry of Fear, explains that the reason for Cry of Fear Remake getting cancelled was due to the lack of funds in developing the game, as well as huge costs that made it difficult to see a consistent development cycle that would lead to completion. Interestingly, another attempt at this remake was also experimented on the Unreal Engine, but ultimately was also scrapped. However, even though Cry of Fear Remake was cancelled and to most likely never be seen to come to fruition, Team Cyclar would announce that the plans to develop a new horror game were being worked on, most likely a spiritual successor to Cry of Fear, but only time will tell. As far as I'm concerned, this is all the lost and cut content of Cry of Fear that I could uncover through my research and findings. If there is any piece of content that I potentially missed, please feel free to let me know in the comments below, as that would be much appreciated. Anyways, that's me. Thank you for watching, please have a great day, stay safe, and goodbye.